8 still. Religion and temperament. Page 156. What are we worried about? What are we trying to avoid? What are we focusing on working through and solving? And to that, there's quite a bit here about warnings. So, for instance, the sad case of Calvin, the cerebrotonic who took his own intellectual constructions so seriously, we do a lot of that he lost all sense of reality, both human and spiritual. And then there is the liberal Protestantism, that predominantly viscerotonic heresy, which seems to have forgotten the very existence of the Father, Spirit, and Logos, and equates Christianity with an emotional attachment to Christ's humanity, or the currently popular phrase, the personality of Jesus, worshipped idolatrously and as though there were no other God, or actual God in truth, experience, consciousness, connection. Even within all-comprehensive Catholicism, we constantly hear complaints of the ignorant and self-centered directors who impose upon the souls under their charge a religious dharma wholly unsuited to their nature, with results which writers such as St. John of the Cross describe as wholly pernicious. We see then that it is natural for us to think of God as possessed of the qualities which our temperaments tends to make us perceive in him. But unless nature finds a way of transcending itself by means of itself, we are lost. If you find that God hates the same people you do, you can be sure that you have created God in your image, as opposed to you being an extension or creation of God or consciousness. In the last analysis, Philo is quite right in saying that those who do not conceive God purely and simply as the one injure not God, of course, but themselves, and along with themselves, their fellows. All right. Practical application. Let's focus on that a little bit. The way of knowledge comes most naturally to persons whose temperament is predominantly cerebrotonic. Thinking, focusing on that. His specially besetting sins are just as difficult to overcome as are the sins which beset the power-loving somatotonic and the extreme viscerotonic with his gluttony for food and comfort and social approval. Rather, I mean that the idea that such a way exists and can be followed, either by discrimination or through non-attached work and one-pointed devotion, is one with which spontaneously occurs to the cerebrotonic. At all levels of culture, he is the natural monotheist, and his natural monotheist, and this natural monotheist, as Dr. Radden's example of primitive theology clearly shows, is often a monotheist of the Tatvium Asi, inner light school, that art thou. Persons committed by their temperament to one or other of the two kinds of extroversions are naturally polytheist, naturally drawn to love and worship many other things. But natural polytheists can, without much difficulty, be convinced of the theoretical superiority of monotheism. We're all connected, everything is one, and it really does matter what you do, mostly to yourself, but, harming others. The nature of human reason is such that there is an intrinsic plausibility about any hypothesis which seeks to explain the manifold in terms of unity, to reduce apparent multiplicity to essential identity. And from this theoretical monotheism, the half-converted polytheist can, if he chooses, go on through practices suitable to his own particular temperament, to the actual realization of the divine ground of his own and all other beings. He can, I repeat, and sometimes he actually does, but very often he does not. There are many theoretical monotheists whose whole life and every action prove that in reality they are still what their temperament inclines them to be, polytheists, worshippers not of the one God or consciousness or awareness or connection of everything that they sometimes talk about, but of the many gods, nationalistic and technological, financial, familial, and to whom in practice they pay all their allegiance. All right, so in regards to Christianity, Speaking of this Jesus fellow as someone who is more of an introvert, a cerebrotonic, contemplative, one specifically who had used the psychophysical peculiarities of his own nature to transcend nature, who had followed his particular dharma to its spiritual goal, the insistence that the kingdom of heaven is within, the ignoring of ritual, the slightly contemptuous attitude towards legalism, towards the ceremonial routines of organized religion, towards hallowed days and places, the general otherworldliness, the emphasis laid upon restraint, not merely of overt action, but even of desire and expressed intention, the indifference to the splendors of material civilization and the love of poverty as one of the greatest of goods, the doctrine that non-attachment must be carried even into the sphere of family relationships, and that even devotion to the highest goals of merely human ideals, even the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, may be idolatrous distractions from the love of God. Primitive Buddhism is no less predominantly cerebrotonic than primitive Christianity, and so is Vedanta, the metaphysical discipline which lies in the heart of Hinduism. Confucianism, on the contrary, is a mainly viscerotonic system, familial, ceremonious, and thoroughly this-worldly. And in Mohammedanism, we find a system which incorporates strong somatotonic elements, the aggressive. Hence, Islam's black record of holy wars and persecutions, a record comparable to that of later Christianity, after that religion had so far compromised with unregenerate somatotonia, aggressive yet in time, as to call its ecclesiastical organization the Church Militant. Really? All right, so how do we temper this? So far as the achievement of man's final end is concerned, it is as much of a handicap to be an extreme cerebrotonic or an extreme viscerotonic as it is to be an extreme somatotonic. And all the extremes are extremes. So, but whereas the cerebrotonic and the viscerotonic cannot do much harm except to themselves and those in immediate contact with them, the extreme somatotonic, with his native aggressiveness, plays havoc with whole systems. So, in a lot of other cultures, this has been tempered. From one point of view, civilization may be defined as a complex of religious, legal, and educational devices for preventing extreme somatotonics from doing too much mischief and for directing their irrepressible energies from doing too much mischief into social desirable channels instead. Confucianism and Chinese culture have sought to achieve this by inculcating filial piety, good manners, and an amiable viscerotonic Epicureanism. Buddhism, classic Taoism, caste systems in India, so on and so forth. But then here we go. Let's get to how we deal with this, because we know what it is. Page 159 in the middle. Power has been limited only by other powers, not by an appeal to first principles as interpreted by those who are morally and spiritually qualified to know what they are talking about. The seers, the spiritual people, the saints, the sages. Meanwhile, the interest in religion has everywhere declined, and even among believing Christians, the perennial philosophy has been to a great extent replaced by a metaphysic of inevitable progress and an evolving God, by a passionate concern, not with eternity, but with future time. And almost suddenly, within the last quarter of a century, and this was 75 years ago, there has been consummated what Sheldon calls a somatotonic revolution directed against all that is characteristically cerebrotonic in the theory and practice of traditional Christian culture, meaning it's just been overlaid by future, too much control. So in traditional Christianity, as in all the great religious formulations of the perennial philosophy, it was axiomatic that contemplation is the end and purpose of action. So instead of action directed towards material and social progress as the end, so warnings, right? All right. In traditional Christianity, as in other formulations of the perennial philosophy, the secret of happiness and the way to salvation were to be sought not in the external environment, but in the individual state of mind with regard to environment. And that's pretty much the idea, and it keeps going with the system of somatotonics, nationalism, etc. All right.